This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast, where we believe prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. I'm your host, Steve Miller. This is episode 50, and in today's podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with Mitch Moore. Mitch is a dynamic educator who has a passion for training people and serves those who serve by designing and delivering training across America. He is an advanced certified prevention specialist and a licensed chemical dependency counselor who has extensive experience working with youth and families in both prevention and recovery settings. He has served as a counselor, prevention specialist, and executive director of a charitable organization. In 2019, he was awarded the Texas Prevention Specialist of the Year. He is currently an independent contractor, a beekeeper, and volunteers his time as a board member for Prevention Training Services. Before we get into the content, we would like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Mitchell Moore. We're so glad that you're with us today.
Thank you very much, Steve, and welcome to all who are listening.
Mitchell Moore, what was your path to prevention? How did you get to where we are today through this thing called prevention?
Well, there are a lot of factors that got me here, but one moment that stands out, I was working in a small West Texas town as a mechanic, and I was trying to stab a transmission in a truck, and it wasn't going well. It wasn't going well because I was concerned about a friend of mine who had come back to town, and he was strung out on, at that time, crack. And we didn't know what to do. We didn't have any resources. So here I am under this pickup fighting this transmission, but really my brain was worried about a friend who was in trouble. And at that time, I kind of looked up and I just said out loud, I wish I didn't have to do this for a living so that I could help people instead. Now, be careful what you throw out to the world because some of those things might come true. Now, that following week, and this is before we had internet, before we could Google things, that following week, I went through the phone book and called every treatment facility I could find in Texas to try to get a place for my friend to go. And I discovered pretty quickly in the mid-'80s, if you didn't have insurance or a lot of money, you didn't have a place to go. And so again, after lots of searching, I found one local charity who worked with other people who were in trouble. And they took him in and helped him find his sobriety. So with that said, not long after that incident, that particular job closed, and I was looking for a path. And so I said to my friend in another town, hey, can you hire me? I'm very interested in prevention. And she says, well, our funding is gone. This is our last week. We're about to close. But here's the name and number of another person. Give them a call and see what they can do. That particular interview landed me on a path of 19 years with a charitable foundation that worked with young people who were upside down, who were struggling to stay sober, as well as provide prevention efforts in the school. So, Steve, I'd just say, be careful what you ask for. It might come true.
That's a great story. You promised me that it would be a good story about how you got into prevention. And as you were sharing that, I was thinking, there's some similarities in there for, how I and most people that I talked to somebody recently on this podcast that said, it was quite by accident, I assure you, because it's almost like none of us really know that this exists, this idea of prevention as a job or a career that you would aspire for. I don't remember that being discussed, my junior year in high school. But, when I was the facilitator for a DUI program, I remember thinking there's got to be something that happens, like before this DUI, it's like this is going to change their lives in so many ways. But yet so many people keep coming into this pipeline. And I didn't know anything about prevention as a discipline or as a career before that. But it's kind of like you said, I remember thinking, there's got to be something more to this. And lo and behold, at some point, I found out that what that something was this discipline of prevention that I know it now. And I think that is, it as well. The other thing that I thought that was interesting in your conversation is just that notion of really wanting to help someone, really just make a difference in the life of some one person. And somehow or another, that seems to be a common denominator for people that find themselves in this particular, career, if that's what we want to call it. Vocation is what I keep coming up with in my mind. So you spent a lot of years, as you said, working for a particular agency doing that. And then at some point, you and some others launched what's called the Prevention Training Services. Can you talk a little bit about what Prevention Training Services is, and why I wanted to talk to you to begin with is that you kind of have set yourself apart from what other services might be provided, at least as far as I know. So if you talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed in our field is a constant turnover. And I don't know if there's any gardeners on the podcast today, but if you take that tomato plant and yank it up and stick it somewhere else every week, that tomato plant's not going to do very good. And I say the same's true for our workforce. If you don't stick along in prevention long enough to root into the community and produce fruit, then basically you just have a job. And I see prevention more as a mission, more as a life, not as a job. With that said, we continue to see people just turning over. And I kept asking myself, how are we going to make a difference in the community if we don't stay long enough to see any fruit from our labor? So 3 of us formed a nonprofit called Prevention Training Services, whose sole focus is to help ramp up that onboarding process of someone new in prevention where they're actually functioning to produce that fruit. It's easy to find people who have a big heart, who have a passion, who want to serve, who want to help people. But now we have to go from 0 to 60 in a short amount of time to give them the skills they need to make a difference. Mm-hmm. When I first got in prevention, my director said, Mitchell, you have a big heart, but you don't have any skill. How can we provide you that training so that you're not just busy doing good, but you're actually doing something great that produces great fruit? So that's our goal at Prevention Training Service. And the term I like to use is praxis, Praxis. That's how do we turn all of this knowledge and theory into something that we can actually apply in our school, in our community, maybe even in our own family.
Well, when you use that term praxis, and to me, that's kind of that really being skilled, a practical application of prevention science, if you will. And, when I look at the industries that we're all a part of, behavioral health industry or the treatment industry, it's almost like with mental health, there's a really clear cut kind of mission. There's probably a crisis that's happened, and we want to try to provide some sort of relief for that crisis. And if there's an addiction, we want to try to get the individual the help they need for recovery. I think the challenge for prevention is how do you know your job was successful? You prevented anything from ever happening, and it's kind of like which ball where's the ball underneath the Dixie cup? Which one's it under, and it's that's moving around. but I'm a firm believer in prevention. And I think that the truth in this is this idea that you're saying, this praxis where we really kind of bring a vision to what prevention is and really make it a reality. I mean, is that really, I mean, how do you demonstrate that you prevented something? I mean, that's almost sounds impossible, but yet I believe in prevention. Can you explain how that's that phenomenon is a reality?
When I first stepped into this field, someone said what you're saying. They're saying you can't measure what doesn't occur. Mm-hmm. And so we really quickly learned that knowledge, skills, and attitude change leads toward behavior change. Mm-hmm. So a little math, KSA equals B. Now, behavioral change takes time, but we can attribute knowledge, skills, and attitude change. And so I've said it often, whatever activities you're doing in prevention, you need to be measuring those. So you go do a presentation. Did you increase the participants' knowledge? And we do a pre-post test to see how much knowledge gain they had. Now, knowledge alone doesn't change behavior. Listen, I still do some things, even though I know better, I still do them, right? And so it's not just enough to give the knowledge, but we also have to provide the skill, those decision-making skills, problem skills, all of the life skills that none of us were born with. But I think the big focus is the attitude change. For example, perception of harm. So you go do a presentation on the dangers of smoking. Now, before I didn't know smoking was bad, and now I know smoking's bad. And how does that attitude change, that perception of harm, cause me to begin to contemplate my behavior change? So I may not be able to show you how many people did not get a substance use disorder, but I can measure every activity and prevention I do, pre-post test for knowledge, pre-post test for skill, do an opinion survey for that attitude, because KSA equals B. When I first got in the field in the early 80s, all I had was a sock with a hole in it to use as a puppet, right? And we've come a long way from those holy socks, or even actual puppets and programs that we could push play. And we started realizing that it's not enough to tell a person don't do, but we need to tell them what to do. How can you be healthier? How can you be happier? How can you contribute to society? And so for me, I think prevention is encapsulated in building health. Because if we're building health, and this is emotional, physical, social, spiritual, it's all those different dimensions. If we're teaching them what they can do, that's a much better application than telling them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Mm-hmm. But one thing I will say, addiction being a chronic, often relapsing brain disease, anything we can do to help prevent someone from getting this chronic, often relapsing brain disease may save them and their family from a lifetime of trouble. So while prevention has many aspects, and while I am a believer in recovery, I often think about it as a broken leg. If I break my leg and I heal, I'll live the rest of my life on a healed, broken leg. So recovery and treatment are possible. Mm-hmm. But wouldn't it be nice if I never broke my leg to start with?
Absolutely. What helps to foster that is bringing in, new recruits, new employees, and bringing them through this process of understanding this for the long term. Like, how do we really have this praxis come into fruition, and where people not only come to prevention, but come to love prevention and come to stay in prevention and come to see the benefits of providing prevention in the community. I mean, it's not an overnight task. It's if you look at the continuum of care, promotion happens across the life cycle, right? And that's kind of what we're in the business of, is trying to promote good behavioral health, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever that may be.
Well, Steve, all of us in this field for any length of time have been trained by those who are competent, by those who've been doing the work. And I could count on all my fingers and toes, and include your fingers, the number of people who've helped me be better. And so with that said, I think it's an obligation for us to pass on not only what we've experienced and what we've learned, but also to make sure that we have enough people in the workforce to actually make a difference in the community. Networking is the best free tool we have in prevention. And that's the concept of the academies. We wanted to bring prevention specialists from around the country together in a virtual format to get to know each other. I don't want to equate it to like summer camp when we were kids, but when we spent time around the campfire and when we spent time in the cafeteria, we began to bond, therefore becoming lifelong friends. Mm-hmm. Now, you and I both have lifelong friends in this family of prevention. And so our Prevention Specialist Academy was, a great opportunity to bring people together, not just to network and get each other's name and number, but to actually connect with each other. But here's a challenge. The agencies aren't going to pay you to go to adult summer camp, right? And so we've got to offer some skill. We've got to offer some training. We've got to offer something tangible. And there's so much knowledge on the internet. I don't want to just provide knowledge. I want to teach you something. Well, I don't have all of the skill sets that I could teach everyone. So we brought trainers in with specific skill sets. And that was our call for presenters for our international conference that we recently held. I asked the presenters to name the skill the participant would leave with. I don't want to just sit and get. I don't want to just be in another training. Goodness, email me the PowerPoint or send me the brochure. I'll read it and get the knowledge. I want to be able to do something. And what I want to do is make my family a little healthier, make my community a little better, maybe make my world a little bit stronger. Steve, a lot of times people say, I cannot possibly make a difference. There's like 8 billion people on the planet. But I say to you, every day, your choices and actions make this planet 1/8 billionth better or not. Mm-hmm. Now, never underestimate the power of what you're doing, because you don't know how it might benefit an individual. Steve, as a beekeeper, I've got 2 hives. One is a weak hive. It only has about 1,000 bees in it. And the other is a very strong hive. It has about 20,000 bees in it. Now, at the end of the spring, which hive do you think is going to produce the most honey? And if we're going to make this world a sweeter place, we've got to have 50,000 prevention specialists in our community, not just 1,000 prevention specialists. So workforce development, just like raising bees, helps make the world a much sweeter place.
What it comes down to is, you mentioned networking, and to me that equates to talking to one another. How do we help that one person when Mitch is under the car trying to get the transmission stuck? You're like, I want to do something else besides this. I want to help somebody. And that planted the seed in the universe. And I'm the same way. One person at a time makes a difference, but I don't know everything. And that's why I would turn to someone that has those skills or that knowledge base. And it sounds like you're kind of creating a community where people that are in our industry can turn to. And And either add to or take away from. I mean, isn't that what prevention is? Adding to and taking away from?
Absolutely, Steve. I think of the ripples in the pond that the pebble makes. And when we were born, we were 100% dependent on a caregiver. And our goal was to become independent, to be our own person, do our own thing, find our own purpose. But very quickly, we realized we're not independent. We are very social humans, whether you're introvert or extrovert, but we're very social and we're interdependent. And if you don't believe that we're interdependent, then just go pour yourself a glass of juice and think of how many hands it took for you to be able to enjoy that juice. Not only the farmer that grew the fruit, but the one who made the jar for it to go in, the one who stocked it on the shelf, the one who created the refrigeration, the truckers. I mean, when we look at our society, and I'm going to go back to the beehive again, every bee in that beehive has a specific job and a specific purpose, and the end goal sure is sweet. Now, Steve, I do not know what your purpose is. That's for you to discover. But I believe that you were born on purpose and with a purpose. And I believe that somewhere, someone needs exactly what you have to deliver them. We figure out how to start connecting and to be interconnected. We're going to be a much stronger family. We're going to be a much stronger community. And that's going to create a much better world.
As we start to wrap up, I'm curious, what is like one thing that you would like the audience to know or to do? A lot of times I'll do a presentation and I'll say, tell 3 people what you learned today, something like that, just to try to pay it forward. But what is one thing that, Mitchell Moore would like the audience to know or to do, or maybe you've got a list of 2 or 3 things you would like for them to know or do?
Well, Steve, I think one thing I'd like to leave with those listening is to be yourself and not try to be anyone else, to share what you have and not compare to everyone else. We all have eyes that see, but you see the world differently than I do. And we all have fingers and hands that touch, but you're going to touch the world differently than I am. And what that means is that you're unique, you're valuable because you're rare. Do you realize that since this world started spinning, there never has been nor will there ever be you? Oh, there are people that might look like you or dress like you, but you were born on purpose. Find your purpose and serve who's in front of you today. That would be my message.
It's a delight to have a chance to sit down and talk with you, Mitch. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast with us today.
Very good. Thank you so much. And for those of y'all who are listening, be you.
Thank you for listening to this Mid-America PTTC podcast. To learn more about any upcoming trainings, visit pttcnetwork.org and look under your PTTC for the Mid-America link. Remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.